Captain Harrison Vance's voice cut across the memorial plaza like a blade, stopping the old man mid-step. The ceremony had not started. The guests had not arrived. And somehow, impossibly, this vagrant had made it past the main gate. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" The words were not a question. They were an accusation. The old man turned slowly, and what Captain Vance saw confirmed everything he already suspected. Filthy, ragged, a walking embarrassment to the naval installation that Vance had spent 3 months preparing for today's memorial ceremony. The vagrant wore an olive-drab jacket so faded it had turned almost gray, held together with safety pins and what looked like electrical tape at the cuffs. His beard was silver and unkempt. His boots were wrapped with more tape, barely holding together. But his eyes, there was something about his eyes that made Vance hesitate for just a moment. Something steady, something that did not belong on a face like that. "Sir," the old man said, and his voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from disuse. "I'm just trying to reach the wall. Then I will leave." The wall. Vance almost laughed. The memorial wall was 50 feet behind him, bronze plaques gleaming in the morning light, names of fallen sailors and special operators etched into metal for eternity. That wall was sacred. That wall was for families. That wall was absolutely not for whatever this creature was. "The wall is for families of the fallen," Vance said, loud enough that the 2 petty officers setting up chairs nearby could hear. "Not for drunks playing dress-up." The old man did not flinch, did not defend himself. He simply stood there, weight balanced on both feet despite his obvious exhaustion, hands loose at his sides. There was something about his posture that nagged at Vance, something wrong about the way this vagrant held himself, but the captain pushed the thought away. "If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country." Stories like this one happen everywhere, in every community, and you might just have a quiet legend in your own neighborhood whose appearance hides an extraordinary truth. "Now, let us continue. How did you even get on base?" Vance demanded, stepping closer. The old man smelled like the street, like failure, like everything Vance had spent his career avoiding. "I walk, sir." The old man's voice carried no complaint, no self-pity, just fact. "For miles from the shelter on Hendricks Avenue. I come every year. Same day. Every year." Vance filed that away as further evidence of delusion. Probably some mental case who had convinced himself he had served. Vance had seen 100 men like this, drifting through VA hospitals and veterans organizations, claiming service they had never rendered, sacrifice they had never made. "That jacket," Vance said, gesturing with contempt. "Where did you get it?" "Goodwill. Salvation Army Costume Department." For the first time, something flickered in the old man's eyes. Not anger. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like grief. "It belonged to a friend, sir." "Right." Vance turned to the petty officers, making sure they were watching, making sure they saw how their captain handled problems. "A friend. Let me guess. You served together. You were brothers in arms. You have medals somewhere that you just cannot find." The old man said nothing. His hand moved almost unconsciously to touch the faded patch on his left shoulder. The patch was so worn that Vance could barely make out its shape. Some kind of trident merged with something else, probably bought at a surplus store for $5. Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Vasquez was crossing the plaza with a clipboard when she noticed the confrontation. She altered her course, approaching from the captain's blind side, and what she saw made her slow her steps. The vagrant's posture, the way he stood at something close to attention, even though his body was clearly exhausted. The way his eyes tracked Captain Vance's movements with an economy that seemed trained rather than learned. "I'm going to give you one chance," Vance said, his voice carrying across the plaza now, theatrical in its authority. "Leave now. Walk back through that gate. And do not ever let me see you on this installation again." The old man's jaw tightened. His fingers touched the dog tags hidden beneath his ragged jacket. 2 names hung on that chain, his own and another. A name carved into the bronze wall 50 feet away. A name he had whispered every morning for 40 years. "Sir," he said quietly, with respect, "I only need a moment at the wall. Just one moment." Then I will leave, and I will not cause any more trouble. Vance stepped closer, close enough to see the scars on the old man's hands. Knuckles like stone, fingers that had clearly been broken and healed wrong. Hands that told a story Vance was not interested in reading. "You do not belong here," Vance said. "And if you're not gone in 60 seconds, I am calling military police to drag you out in front of every distinguished guest arriving for this ceremony. Do you understand me?" The old man looked past Vance, past the chairs being arranged, past the podium bearing the naval seal. His eyes found the wall, found the names, found the one name that had kept him alive through 12 years of sleeping under bridges and eating from dumpsters and refusing every hand that reached out to help him because he did not deserve help. He did not deserve warmth. He did not deserve anything but the cold and the dark and the memory of the man whose jacket he still wore. "Yes, sir," he said. "I understand." But he did not move. And Captain Harrison Vance, standing there in his pristine uniform with his pristine career and his pristine ignorance, had no idea that the faded patch on that ragged jacket was the same emblem his own father kept framed above his desk at home. The emblem of men who officially never existed. The emblem of ghosts who had saved his father's life 40 years ago in a jungle that was never supposed to exist on any map. In exactly 47 minutes, Captain Vance would be on his knees. And the word he would be whispering, the word that would break something inside him forever, was a name he had heard his father's stories 100 times but never thought to learn. The smell hit him first. Gun oil. Clean and sharp and unmistakable. The honor guard was assembling near the flagpoles, rifles gleaming in the morning light, and the scent of their weapons drifted across the plaza on the autumn breeze. Raymond Holloway closed his eyes, and he was 28 years old again. Panama, December 1983. The submarine had surfaced just long enough to release them into black water. 6 men in wetsuits sliding into the Caribbean darkness like phantoms. No moonlight, no sound except the gentle lap of waves against the hull. Bishop had been first into the water, always first, his hand finding Raymond's shoulder in the darkness. A squeeze that meant stay close. A squeeze that meant I have got you, brother. They had swum 3 miles to shore, cached their diving gear in undergrowth that smelled like rot and rain, changed into jungle fatigues, and painted their faces with colors that made them disappear. 6 men who did not exist, on an operation that would never be acknowledged, to extract a naval officer who had been captured during a reconnaissance mission gone wrong. Lieutenant Theodore Vance, 26 years old, held for interrogation in a compound that officially was not there. Raymond could still feel the weight of his rifle. The Barrett was too heavy for most men to carry through jungle terrain, but Raymond had trained with it until it felt like an extension of his own body. 400 meters was his optimal range. 400 meters between him and whatever stood between his team and their objective. Bishop used a joke that Raymond could shoot the wings off a fly at that distance. Bishop used to joke about everything. The compound had been exactly where intelligence said it would be. 12 hostiles. 1 prisoner. Simple extraction. They had done harder missions before breakfast. Raymond opened his eyes. The honor guard was still assembling. Captain Vance was still standing in front of him, arms crossed, waiting for him to leave. But Raymond was not seeing the plaza anymore. He was seeing the muzzle flash from the window they had cleared twice. He was seeing Bishop spin and fall. He was seeing blood, so much blood, spreading across jungle floor that swallowed it like rain. "I asked you a question," Vance said, and his voice snapped Raymond back to the present. The captain had moved closer, was speaking directly into his face now, breath hot and aggressive. "I said, how did you really get on this base? Someone let you in. Someone thought it would be funny to let a vagrant wander around before the Admiral arrives. Who is it?" Raymond blinked. Focused. The present reasserted itself with all its weight. He was not 28 anymore. He was 68. His knees ached from the 4-meal walk. His stomach was empty because he had given his breakfast to the younger veteran at the shelter who had been shaking too hard to hold his own spoon. "Nobody let me in, sir," Raymond said. "I know the gaps in the fence line. I have been coming here for 40 years. 40 years. Vance laughed, sharp and mocking. So you've been trespassing on federal property for 4 decades. That is a confession. You understand that, right? I could have you arrested right now. Yes, sir. Raymond's voice did not waver. You could. Something about his calm infuriated Vance further. The captain wanted a reaction, wanted groveling, wanted the satisfaction of watching this pathetic old man break down and beg. Instead, he got quiet dignity, and it made Vance feel like he was the one being judged. Across the plaza, Senior Chief Vasquez watched the confrontation while pretending to check her clipboard. The old man's hands had not moved from his sides. His weight was still perfectly balanced. When Captain Vance stepped closer, the vagrant had not stepped back, had not flinched, had simply absorbed the aggression like water absorbing stone. She had seen that before. In operators, in men who had been trained to remain calm while the world exploded around them. The vagrant's sleeve had ridden up slightly when he touched his shoulder earlier, and Vasquez had caught a glimpse of ink on his forearm. Numbers. A date. Something else she could not quite make out. Her uncle had shown her photographs once, old black and white images of men in jungle fatigues, their arms covered in tattoos that meant nothing to civilians, but everything to those who served in the shadows. Raymond was thinking about Margaret, his wife. Her hair had been red when they married, fading to auburn by the time the cancer took her. She had understood his silences, had known not to ask about the dreams that woke him screaming, had held him through the worst nights, and never demanded explanations he could not give. When she died, something inside Raymond had broken that could not be fixed. He would look at his children, grown by then with families of their own, and all he could see was her face in theirs. Her eyes, her smile, the way his daughter tilted her head when she was thinking, exactly like Margaret used to do. He could not bear it, could not bear their kindness, could not bear the way they looked at him with love he did not deserve. The note had taken him 3 hours to write. 4 sentences. I love you. I am sorry. Live your lives. Do not look for me. 12 years ago. 12 years of shelters and bridges and cold nights when he welcomed the possibility of not waking up. 12 years of watching the world continue without him, proving what he had always suspected, that he was not necessary, that his presence had only ever been a burden. But every year, on December 14th, he came back here, for miles on foot, through the gap in the fence he had discovered decades ago, to the wall where Bishop's name was carved in bronze. Samuel Okonkwo, Petty Officer First Class, the man who had died so that Raymond could live. The man whose jacket Raymond still wore, safety pins and electrical tape holding together fabric that should have rotted away years ago, but somehow had not. As if Bishop himself was keeping it whole. Last chance, Vance said, and his voice had gone quiet now, dangerous. Walk away, right now, or I will make sure you spend the next 6 months in federal custody. Raymond looked at the wall. 50 feet away. Bishop's name was there, 3rd row from the bottom, right side. He could find it with his eyes closed. Had traced those letters with his fingers every year since they had been carved. Sir, Raymond said, and his voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion he had shown. His name is on that wall. I promised him I would never forget. I promised him I would come back every year. And I have not broken that promise yet. For just a moment, something flickered in Captain Vance's eyes. Something that might have been doubt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar contempt. I do not care what you promised, Vance said. I do not care who you think you were. All I see is a trespasser and a liar. The words hung in the air between them, and Raymond Holloway, who had carried wounded men through 3 miles of jungle darkness, who had held his best friend while he bled out on foreign soil, who had saved lives that he would never be thanked for because the missions never existed, simply nodded. Yes, sir, he said. I understand. But his eyes went to the wall again, to the names carved in bronze. And somewhere in that list of the fallen, Samuel Bishop Okonkwo waited for him, as he had waited every year, as he would wait forever. The first guests began arriving at 9:15. Black sedans with government plates. Officers in dress uniforms with medals catching the morning light. Wives in conservative dresses and sensible heels. They filtered through the main gate in a steady stream, guided by petty officers toward the white folding chairs arranged in precise rows before the memorial wall. Captain Vance had not moved from his position in front of Raymond. If anything, the arrival of witnesses had emboldened him. His voice grew louder, his gestures more theatrical. This was a performance now, and he intended for everyone to see how decisively he handled threats to the dignity of his ceremony. "Look at yourself," Vance said, sweeping his hand toward Raymond's ragged form. "You really think anyone here believes you served? You really think that costume fools anyone?" A commander and his wife paused near the refreshment table, watching the confrontation with visible discomfort. A young lieutenant turned away, pretending to check his phone. But no one intervened. No one questioned a captain on his own installation. "I have seen 100 men like you," Vance continued, his voice carrying across the plaza. "Drifters, liars, men who buy medals at pawn shops and tell stories about wars they watched on television. You're not special. You're not a veteran. You are a disgrace." Raymond stood motionless. His eyes had gone distant, focused on something beyond Vance, beyond the plaza, beyond the present moment entirely. The insults washed over him like rain. He had heard worse, had thought worse about himself every day for 12 years. Senior Chief Vasquez moved closer, clipboard forgotten in her hand. Something was wrong with this picture. The vagrant should have broken by now, should have shouted back or collapsed into tears or fled in shame. Instead, he stood there absorbing Captain Vance's assault with the patience of a man who had endured far worse and survived. She studied his face, the scar she had missed before. A thin white line running from his left temple down to his jaw, another across the bridge of his nose. His hands, still loose at his sides, bore the marks of violence. Knuckles that had been shattered and healed. Fingers that bent at angles suggesting breaks that were never properly set. These were not the hands of a man who had spent his life on the streets. These were the hands of a man who had used them as weapons. "The patch," Vasquez said quietly, stepping into the confrontation. "Captain, may I see that patch on his jacket?" Vance turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Senior Chief, this does not concern you. Return to your duties." "Sir, with respect, I think it might concern all of us." Something in her tone made Vance pause. Vasquez was not the type to insert herself into situations without reason. She was methodical, careful, the kind of sailor who noticed details that others missed. Raymond's eyes focused, returning to the present. He looked at Vasquez, and for a moment their gazes held. She saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Recognition, not of her specifically, but of what she was doing. He knew she was trying to help, and the look he gave her was not gratitude. It was warning. "Please," he said softly, the first word he had spoken directly to her. "Leave it alone." Vasquez ignored him. She stepped closer, examining the patch on his left shoulder. The fabric was so faded that the original colors had bled into gray, but the shape was still there. A trident, yes, the mark of a Navy SEAL, but merged with something else. An anchor wrapped in something that looked like chains, or perhaps rope. The design was unlike anything in the official Navy registry. Her uncle had shown her photographs once. Old photographs, edges soft with age. Men in jungle fatigues standing before helicopters that bore no markings. Her uncle's hands had trembled when he held those pictures. They called themselves ghosts, he had told her. Men who did not exist. Units that were never formed. Operations that never happened. If you ever meet one of them, Mija, you will know. They carry it in their eyes. "What unit is this?" Vasquez asked, pointing to the patch. "I do not recognize the insignia." Raymond said nothing. Vance laughed. "Of course you do not recognize it. He probably designed it himself. Drew it with a marker in some shelter bathroom." But Vasquez was not listening to Vance anymore. She was watching Raymond's face. Watching the way his jaw tightened when she touched the patch. Watching the way his hand moved, almost imperceptibly, toward the jacket. Protective. The way a man protects something sacred. "This jacket," she said slowly. "It was not always yours, was it?" Raymond's voice came out rough. "No, ma'am. It belonged to a friend. The friend whose name is on that wall." Raymond closed his eyes. When he opened them again, There was moisture there that he could not hide. "Yes, ma'am." Captain Vance stepped between them, breaking the moment. "Enough. I do not know what game you think you're playing, Senior Chief, but this trespasser is leaving. Now." He reached for Raymond's arm. His fingers closed around the fabric of the jacket, around the sleeve that covered the tattoo Vasquez had glimpsed earlier. And Raymond did something he had not done in 40 years. He reacted. It was over in less than a second. Vance's hand was removed from his arm and twisted at an angle that sent the captain stumbling back. Raymond had not even appeared to move. One moment Vance was grabbing him. The next moment Vance was 3 feet away, rubbing his wrist with shock written across his face. Raymond's posture had changed. His spine was straight. His shoulders were square. The homeless vagrant had vanished, replaced by something else entirely. Something that made the watching officers take an unconscious step backward. The transformation lasted only a moment. Then Raymond seemed to catch himself. His shoulders slumped. His spine curved. The soldier disappeared back into the broken man. "I apologize," he said quietly. "That was instinct. I should not have done that." But it was too late. Vasquez had seen it. The officers at the refreshment table had seen it. Captain Vance had felt it. And across the plaza, just arriving through the main gate, Rear Admiral Theodore Vance leaned on his cane and watched the confrontation with eyes that had suddenly gone very wide. He knew that move, had seen it before. 40 years ago, in a jungle that did not exist, performed by a man who had carried him through 3 miles of darkness while the world exploded around them. "Impossible," the Admiral whispered. His hand tightened on his cane until his knuckles went white. It could not be, but his legs were already carrying him forward, toward the vagrant, toward the ghost, toward the man he had spent 4 decades trying to find. The jungle had been silent in the moments before everything went wrong. Raymond remembered that silence now. The way the insects had stopped singing. The way the air itself had seemed to hold its breath. Bishop had raised his fist, the signal to halt, and 6 men had frozen in the darkness like statues carved from shadow. They had cleared the compound in 11 minutes. Textbook operation. 12 hostiles neutralized without a single shot that was not suppressed. Lieutenant Theodore Vance had been found in a basement room, blindfolded and bound to a chair, his left arm hanging at an angle that meant it had been broken at least twice during interrogation. Raymond had cut his bindings while Bishop secured the exit. The lieutenant had been barely conscious, mumbling something about not talking, about not giving them anything, about holding on because he knew someone would come. His eyes had been swollen shut from beatings, his lips cracked and bleeding. But when Raymond had lifted him into a fireman's carry, the young officer had whispered 2 words that Raymond still heard in his dreams. "Thank you." They had made it 200 meters from the compound when the ambush hit. The window, Raymond could still see it. 3rd floor of a building they had cleared and marked as secure. The muzzle flash had been brief, a flicker of orange in the darkness, and then Bishop was spinning, falling, his body twisting in ways that bodies should not twist. Raymond had returned fire on instinct. The Barrett had roared once, and the window had gone dark. But the damage was done. Bishop was down, and the jungle that had been silent was now alive with shouts and gunfire and the sound of men who wanted them dead. Contact rear. Bishop's voice had been steady despite the blood spreading across his chest. Multiple hostiles. 300 meters and closing. Raymond had dropped beside him, hands pressing against wounds that would not stop bleeding. The bullet had entered just below the ceramic plate of his vest, tearing through flesh and muscle and everything that kept a man alive. "Get him out." Bishop had grabbed Raymond's wrist with a grip that was still impossibly strong. "That is the mission, Spectre. Get the lieutenant to extraction. I will hold them here. You will die." Bishop had smiled then. That smile Raymond would see every night for the rest of his life. Probably. But he goes home. His family gets him back. That is what matters. I am not leaving you. Yes, you are. Bishop had pushed him away, raised his rifle, began laying down suppressive fire toward the approaching hostiles. "Go, brother. I will catch up." They both knew he would not. Raymond had carried Lieutenant Vance for 3 miles through jungle that wanted to swallow them whole. His shoulders had screamed. His legs had burned. The lieutenant had drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling, sometimes silent, sometimes crying out in pain when Raymond stumbled over roots he could not see in the darkness. Behind them, Bishop's rifle had kept firing. For 20 minutes, that rifle had spoken. 20 minutes of covering fire that kept the hostiles pinned, that bought Raymond the time he needed to reach the extraction point. And then the rifle had gone silent. Raymond had stopped, had stood in the darkness with a broken man on his shoulders and tears streaming down his face. He had wanted to go back. Every fiber of his being had screamed at him to turn around, to find Bishop, to carry him out too. But the mission was the mission, and Bishop had given his life to complete it. The extraction helicopter had been waiting at the coordinates Bishop had memorized. Bishop had always memorized the coordinates. That was his job. Point man, navigator, the one who always knew the way home. Raymond had loaded the lieutenant into the helicopter, had watched the medics swarm over him, cutting away his clothes, starting IVs, shouting words that meant nothing through the roar of the rotors. And then Raymond had sat in the corner of that helicopter and had not spoken for 3 days. The memory released him slowly, reluctantly, like water draining from a basin. Raymond blinked and found himself back in the present, standing on the Memorial Plaza with Captain Vance staring at him with something new in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or confusion. The easy contempt had been replaced by uncertainty. What the hell was that? Vance demanded, still rubbing his wrist. Where did you learn to do that? Raymond did not answer. His eyes had found the Admiral making his way across the plaza. The old man moved slowly, leaning heavily on his cane, but his path was direct, unwavering. He was not heading toward the stage or the VIP section or any of the other places an Admiral might be expected to go. He was heading straight for Raymond. Dad, Captain Vance had noticed his father's approach. What are you doing? The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. You should be. Theodore. The Admiral's voice cut his son off mid-sentence. It was a voice accustomed to command, to obedience, to being heard. Be quiet. Vance's mouth snapped shut. The Admiral stopped 10 feet from Raymond. His eyes moved over the vagrant's face, searching, cataloging, comparing what he saw to memories 4 decades old. His hand trembled on his cane. That move, the Admiral said softly, the way you redirected his grip, turned his momentum against him. I have only seen that technique once before. Raymond said nothing, but his spine had straightened again, almost against his will. Muscle memory asserting itself in the presence of a superior officer. December 1983, the Admiral continued. Panama. I was 26 years old. Broken arm. Blindfolded. Certain I was going to die in that basement. Sir. Raymond's voice was barely audible. You should return to your ceremony. A man carried me out of that compound. The Admiral's voice cracked. Carried me 3 miles through jungle while his team died around him. I never saw his face clearly. Never learned his name. The operation was classified so deeply that even I was not permitted to know who saved my life. The plaza had gone quiet. Officers and guests stood frozen, watching the exchange. Captain Vance looked between his father and the homeless man with growing horror dawning on his face. I have spent 40 years trying to find that man, the Admiral said. 40 years of dead ends and classified files and doors that would not open. I gave up hope a decade ago, convinced myself he must be dead, that I would never get to say the words I have carried since that night. He took another step forward. His eyes were wet, and now I find him here, at the memorial, in a jacket held together with safety pins, being screamed at by my own son. The Admiral's voice broke completely on the last word, and Raymond Holloway, who had not cried since the night Margaret died, felt something crack open inside his chest. The silence that followed the Admiral's words spread across the plaza like a wave. Officers stopped mid-conversation. Guests turned from the refreshment table. Even the honor guard, assembling near the flagpoles, seemed to sense that something significant was unfolding. Captain Vance stood paralyzed between his father and the vagrant he had spent the last hour humiliating. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile what he was hearing with what he thought he knew. His father had told him the story of the rescue 100 times. The jungle, the darkness, the man who had appeared like a ghost and carried him to safety. But the man in those stories was a legend, a warrior, not this broken creature in a tattered jacket. "Dad," Vance said, his voice uncertain, "you cannot be serious. Look at him. He is homeless. He is. I know exactly what he looks like, Harrison." The Admiral did not take his eyes off Raymond. "I know what 4 decades of carrying the weight of dead brothers looks like. I have seen it in the mirror often enough." Raymond had not moved, had not spoken. His eyes were fixed on a point somewhere beyond the Admiral, beyond the plaza, beyond the present moment. But his hands had begun to tremble. 40 years of walls, carefully constructed, were starting to crack. Senior Chief Vasquez stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Sir, if I may." She addressed the Admiral directly. The patch on his jacket. I believe I recognize the design. My uncle served in Vietnam-era special operations. He showed me photographs, once of men who wore something similar. The Admiral nodded slowly. Unit Phantom, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, attached to operations that officially never existed. They were disbanded in 1985, all records sealed. The men who serve in that unit were ghosts before that word meant anything in the special operations community. Vasquez inhaled sharply. Her uncle had spoken of such men in whispers. Men who walked through walls. Men who completed missions that no one else could complete. Men who came home to families who could never know where they had been or what they had done. The patch, the Admiral continued, stepping closer to Raymond. It was designed by the unit's first commanding officer. A trident for the SEALs who formed its core. An anchor for the Navy that deployed them. And chains for the men they rescued from captivity. For the prisoners they brought home. He reached out slowly, giving Raymond time to pull away and touch the faded fabric on his shoulder. His fingers traced the worn emblem with something like reverence. "I have a photograph of this patch in my study," the Admiral said, "given to me by the man who wore it the night he saved my life. He pressed it into my hand as the medics loaded me onto the helicopter. Told me to keep it, told me to remember." Raymond's voice came out broken. "Horse, you were supposed to forget, sir. That was the protocol. You go home, you heal, you live your life, and you forget the men who made it possible. Forget." The Admiral's laugh was bitter. "I have tried, son. For 40 years, I have tried. Do you know what it is like to owe your entire existence to a man whose name you do not know? To wake up every morning knowing that someone gave everything so you could have this life, this career, this family." He gestured toward Captain Vance, who had gone pale. "My son exists because of you. My grandchildren exist because of you. Every good thing I have done in 40 years of service happened because you carried me out of that jungle." Raymond shook his head. "Bishop carried you out. I just finished the job. Bishop." The Admiral repeated the name like a prayer. "The point man. The one who stayed behind. Samuel Okonkwo." Raymond's hand moved to the jacket, pressing the fabric against his chest as if he could feel his friend's heartbeat through the worn threads. "Petty officer, first class. He was the best of us. The best I ever knew. His name is on that wall," the Admiral said softly. "3rd row from the bottom. Right side. I visit it every year. Leave flowers. Say a prayer for a man I never met, but who gave his life so I could live mine." Raymond's composure finally broke. Tears spilled down his weathered cheeks, carving tracks through the grime. 40 years. 40 years of holding everything inside. 40 years of believing he did not deserve recognition or comfort or the simple human kindness of being seen. "I know where his name is," Raymond whispered. "I could find it blindfolded. I have touched every letter 1,000 times. Traced them with my fingers until I could feel them in my sleep." Vasquez had moved to stand beside the Admiral, her clipboard forgotten, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Around them, a crowd had gathered, officers and guests and enlisted personnel drawn by the weight of the moment. Some had pulled out phones, recording without fully understanding what they were witnessing. Captain Vance stood apart from the crowd, his face ashen. The vagrant he had mocked, the trespasser he had threatened, the man he had accused of stolen valor. That man had saved his father's life. That man had given him the gift of existence without ever knowing it. Sir. Vasquez addressed Raymond directly, her voice thick with emotion. Master Chief, whatever your rank was, you need to come with us. You need to be recognized properly. Raymond wiped his face with the back of his hand. Recognized. The word seemed foreign to him. Incomprehensible. I did not come here for recognition, he said. I just came to see his name. To touch the wall. To tell Bishop I am still here. Still trying. The Admiral placed a hand on Raymond's shoulder. The touch was gentle. Careful. The way one touches something precious that might shatter. Then let me take you there, he said. Let me walk with you to that wall. And let me finally say thank you. Not for saving my life, but for giving me the chance to save others. For 40 years of service that only happened because you refused to leave me behind. Raymond looked at the Admiral's hand on his shoulder, looked at the faces of the crowd around him, looked at Captain Vance, standing alone, his arrogance stripped away to reveal the frightened man beneath. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. The Admiral smiled. It was a broken smile, wet with tears, but it was genuine. Come on, soldier, he said. Let us go see your brother. They walked together across the plaza, the Admiral and the vagrant, and the crowd parted before them like water before the bow of a ship. No one spoke. No one dared to break the silence that had settled over the memorial grounds. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Raymond's legs felt unsteady beneath him. The 4-meal walk that morning had drained what little strength he had, and the emotional weight of the last hour had drained what remained. But he kept moving, one foot in front of the other, the way Bishop had taught him, the way they had moved through that jungle 40 years ago. Almost there, brother, he whispered under his breath. Almost there. The Admiral heard him, said nothing, just adjusted his grip on his cane and matched Raymond's pace, step for labored step. Senior Chief Vasquez followed a few feet behind, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in low, urgent tones, but Raymond caught fragments of the conversation. Verification. Service records. Unit Phantom. Classified. She was trying to confirm what her instincts already knew. Behind them, Captain Vance had not moved from where he stood. His fellow officers gave him a wide berth, their eyes sliding past him as if he had become invisible. The man who had mocked a war hero. The man who had threatened to arrest his father's savior. His career was over. Everyone knew it, including him. The memorial wall rose before them, bronze panels gleaming dull gold in the morning light. Thousands of names, etched into metal, organized by conflict and date. Corel, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan. Men and women who had given everything. Who had come home in flag-draped boxes, or not at all. Raymond stopped at the base of the wall. His eyes moved across the names, searching, though he did not need to search. He knew exactly where to look. 3rd row from the bottom. Right side. 7th name from the corner. Samuel Bishop Okonkwo. Petty Officer, 1st Class. United States Navy. His hand reached out, trembling, and his fingers found the letters. The bronze was cold beneath his touch. Cold the way Bishop had been cold when Raymond had finally found his body, 3 days after the extraction, when a recovery team had been sent to retrieve what the jungle had not yet claimed. Hey, brother, Raymond whispered. I made it. I am here. The Admiral stood beside him, close enough to hear, far enough to give him space. Tears streamed freely down the old officer's face. He made no move to wipe them away. Around them, the crowd had formed a semicircle. Officers in dress uniforms, guests in their ceremony attire, enlisted personnel who had abandoned their preparations to witness this moment. Phones were raised, recording, but there was no sense of intrusion, only reverence. Vasquez lowered her phone. Her face had gone pale. Sir, she said, addressing the Admiral, I just spoke with a contact at Naval Special Warfare Command. The records are sealed, but she confirmed the unit designation. Unit Phantom was real. It operated from 1979 to 1985. 6 operations, all classified, all successful. She paused, struggling to maintain her composure. The final operation was December 1983. Panama, codename Distant Thunder. 6 operators inserted, 1 extracted. The sole survivor was listed only by call sign in the after-action report. The Admiral nodded slowly. And the call sign. Vasquez looked at Raymond, at the broken man with his hand pressed against his dead friend's name. Spectre, she said. The call sign was Spectre. The word rippled through the crowd. Spectre. A ghost. A man who did not exist. Who moved through shadows. Who completed missions that could never be acknowledged. Raymond did not react to hearing his call sign spoken aloud. He was lost in the wall. Lost in the names. Lost in memories that played behind his eyes like film footage he could not stop. He remembered Bishop's laugh. The way it had echoed through the barracks at Coronado. The way it had cut through the tension before every mission. Bishop had laughed at everything. At danger. At death. At the absurdity of men who volunteered to do the impossible and somehow kept surviving. He remembered Bishop's wedding. A small ceremony in San Diego. Bishop's mother crying in the front row, his bride radiant in white. Raymond had been the best man. Had fumbled through a toast that made everyone laugh. Had danced with Bishop's sister and stepped on her feet 3 times. He remembered Bishop's daughter. Born 6 months before the Panama operation. Raymond had held her once, a tiny bundle of warmth and possibility, and Bishop had grinned and said she had his eyes. She would be 40 years old now. A woman Raymond had never met. A woman who had grown up without a father because Raymond had not been fast enough, had not seen the muzzle flash in time, had not taken a shot that could have saved his brother's life. "I am sorry," Raymond whispered to the wall. "I am so sorry, Bishop. I should have been faster. I should have seen him. I should have." His voice broke. His shoulders shook. And for the first time in 40 years, Raymond Holloway wept openly. Not the silent tears he had shed moments before, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to tear themselves from somewhere in his chest. Somewhere he had kept locked and buried for 4 decades. The Admiral placed a hand on his back. Vasquez moved closer, her own tears falling freely. And the crowd stood in silence, bearing witness to a grief that had been carried alone for far too long. On the bronze wall, Samuel Bishop Okonkwo's name caught the morning light. And somewhere, Raymond hoped, his brother could hear him, could feel his touch through the cold metal, could know that he had never been forgotten. "Still here, brother," Raymond choked out between sobs. "Still trying, just like I promised. Still here." The sobs subsided slowly, like a storm passing over open water. Raymond kept his hand pressed against Bishop's name, drawing strength from the cold bronze, from the connection to his brother that 40 years and death itself had not been able to sever. The Admiral waited, patient, understanding. He knew what it was to carry grief that had no outlet, knew what it was to owe a debt that could never be repaid. When Raymond finally straightened, wiping his face with the sleeve of Bishop's jacket, the Admiral spoke softly. "I need to know your name," he said. "Your real name. I have waited 40 years to learn it." Raymond turned to face him. His eyes were red, swollen, but there was something different in them now. Something that had been locked away was finally free. "Holloway," he said. "Raymond Holloway, Master Chief Petty Officer. Retired." The Admiral extended his hand. "Raymond Holloway, I am Theodore Vance, and I owe you my life." Raymond looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he reached out and took it. The Admiral's grip was firm despite his age, warm despite the chill in the morning air. "You owe me nothing, sir," Raymond said. "I was just doing my job." "Your job?" The Admiral shook his head. "Your job was to extract me and get me to safety. What you did went far beyond that. You carried me for 3 miles. You left your brothers behind to save me. I left Bishop behind." Raymond's voice cracked on the name. "I left him to die. He ordered you to go." The Admiral tightened his grip on Raymond's hand, refusing to let him pull away. "I was drifting in and out of consciousness, but I heard him. I heard everything. He told you to complete the mission. He told you to save me. And you did. I should have found another way. There was no other way." The Admiral's voice was fierce now, commanding in a way that cut through Raymond's guilt. Bishop knew that. He made a choice. The same choice any of us would have made. The same choice he would have made if the positions were reversed. Raymond said nothing, but he did not pull his hand away. Around them, the crowd had grown. Word had spread through the ceremony grounds, drawing more witnesses to the memorial wall. Bus personnel, visiting dignitaries, local reporters who had been invited to cover the ceremony. All of them watching, all of them recording. Vasquez approached carefully, a bottle of water in her hand. She offered it to Raymond without speaking. He took it, drank deeply. His throat had gone raw from the sobbing, from words he had kept locked inside for decades. Master Chief, Vasquez said, there are people here who want to meet you. People who need to hear your story. Raymond shook his head. I did not come here for that. I came to see Bishop. That is all. I understand, sir. But with respect, you do not get to decide what your service means to others. She gestured toward the crowd, toward the officers in their dress uniforms, many of them wiping tears from their faces, toward the enlisted personnel who stood at attention even though no order had been given, toward the civilians who clutched their programs and stared at Raymond as if seeing something they had only read about in history books. These people need to know that men like you exist, Vasquez continued, that the sacrifices made in the shadows are real, that the heroes we honor on days like this are not just names on a wall. They are flesh and blood. They're standing right here. Raymond looked at the crowd, at the faces filled with emotion, at the phones recording every moment. He had spent 40 years hiding, 40 years convincing himself that he did not matter, that his service did not matter, that the only thing that mattered was the men he had lost. But looking at these faces, he began to understand something he had never allowed himself to consider. His survival was not a betrayal of the dead. It was a testament to their sacrifice. Bishop had died so that Raymond could carry the lieutenant to safety, so that Theodore Vance could live, could serve, could raise a family and protect a nation and stand here 40 years later with tears on his face and gratitude in his heart. If Raymond had died in that jungle, Bishop's sacrifice would have meant nothing. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled slightly, and both the Admiral and Vasquez reached out to steady him. Easy, the Admiral said. I have got you. Raymond looked at the old officer, at the man he had carried through darkness and death, at the life he had saved without ever knowing what it would become. I have spent 40 years hating myself for surviving, Raymond whispered. 40 years believing I should have died with them. The Admiral's eyes glistened. And I have spent 40 years being grateful that you did not. They stood there in silence, two old men connected by a night 4 decades past. Around them, the crowd waited, patient, reverent, understanding that they were witnessing something sacred. Finally, Raymond spoke again. Bishop had a daughter, he said. She was 6 months old when we deployed. I held her once. She had his eyes. The Admiral nodded. I know. I found her years ago. Tried to tell her what her father meant to me, what he sacrificed. Raymond's breath caught. You found her. Her name is Grace. She's a teacher now. Lives in Virginia. Has 3 children of her own. Tears welled in Raymond's eyes again. Grace. Bishop had wanted to name her Grace. Raymond remembered the conversation in the barracks. Bishop grinning as he talked about the daughter he could not wait to meet again. She should be here, Raymond said. She should know what her father did. The Admiral smiled. A small, knowing smile. I made a phone call this morning, he said, before the ceremony, before any of this happened. Grace Okonkwo is on her way. She should arrive within the hour. Raymond stared at him. The Admiral had not known Raymond would be here, had not known any of this would happen. But he had called Bishop's daughter anyway, because today was the anniversary, because some connections transcend time and chance and the boundaries of what we think we know. Raymond looked back at the wall, at Bishop's name carved in bronze. She's coming, brother, he whispered. Your little girl is coming to see you. Captain Harrison Vance had not moved from his position near the refreshment table. The other officers had drifted away from him one by one, drawn to the memorial wall where his father stood with the vagrant. The vagrant who was not a vagrant at all. The vagrant who had saved his father's life. The vagrant Vance had threatened to arrest for trespassing. His hands had not stopped shaking. He watched his father embrace the old man in the tattered jacket, watched Senior Chief Vasquez speak into her phone with increasing urgency. Watch the crowd grow and grow until half the ceremony attendees had abandoned their seats to witness whatever was unfolding at the wall. His career was over. He knew it with absolute certainty. The videos were already spreading. He had seen the phones, had seen the faces of his fellow officers as they recorded his humiliation. By nightfall, every naval installation in the country would know what Captain Harrison Vance had done. By morning, the story would be national news. But worse than the career, worse than the disgrace, was the knowledge that he had looked into the face of a genuine hero and seen only trash to be discarded. His father had told him the story 100 times. The jungle, the darkness, the man who had appeared like a ghost to carry him to safety. Vance had nodded along, had said the right things, had never really listened, because the story was old, because it had happened before he was born, because he had more important things to worry about than ancient history. Now that ancient history stood 50 feet away, wearing a jacket held together with safety pins, and Vance understood for the first time what his father had been trying to tell him all those years. Some men carry burdens you cannot see. Some heroes wear no medals. Some sacrifices leave no visible scars. And Harrison Vance had looked at such a man and seen nothing but an inconvenience to be removed. At the memorial wall, Raymond Holloway stood with his hand still pressed against Bishop's name. The admiral had stepped back slightly, giving him space, but remained close enough to offer support if needed. The ceremony, Vasquez said quietly. "Sir, the ceremony was supposed to start 15 minutes ago. The guests are waiting. What would you like me to do?" The admiral considered for a moment. Then he turned to face the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the command authority of 40 years in uniform. "I apologize for the delay, but I believe what you are witnessing today is more important than any speech I could give, more meaningful than any wreath we could lay." He gestured toward Raymond. "This man served his country in ways that will never be fully acknowledged. He completed missions that officially never happened. He saved lives that can never publicly thank him. And he has spent the last 4 decades carrying a weight that no one should have to carry alone." The admiral paused, his voice thick with emotion. "40 years ago, this man carried me through 3 miles of jungle while his brothers died around him. He saved my life, and until today, I never knew his name." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "His name is Raymond Holloway," the admiral continued. "Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. Call sign Spectre. And if there is any justice in this world, he will finally receive the recognition he has earned." Raymond shook his head slightly, uncomfortable with the attention, but he did not speak. His eyes remained fixed on the wall, on Bishop's name, on the promise he had kept for 40 years. "Sir," Vasquez touched the admiral's arm. "There is a car approaching the main gate. The driver says she is Grace Okonkwo." Raymond went rigid. The admiral nodded. "Let her through. Escort her here directly." Vasquez spoke into a radio, relaying the order. Raymond's hand fell from the wall. His body had begun to tremble again. "I cannot," he whispered. "I cannot face her. I let her father die. You saved the man her father died to protect." The admiral gripped Raymond's shoulder firmly. "You honored his sacrifice by completing the mission, by surviving, by coming back here every year to remember. She will hate me. She will not." "How can you know that?" The admiral smiled sadly. "Because I have spoken to her many times over the years. About her father, about the operation, about the man who carried me out of that jungle. She does not hate you, Raymond. She has been waiting her whole life to meet you." Raymond stared at him. 40 years of guilt. 40 years of believing he had failed his brother. 40 years of hiding from a world he thought would condemn him for surviving when better men had died. And now he was being told that Bishop's daughter wanted to meet him, that she had been waiting, that she did not hate the man who had left her father behind in a jungle that officially never existed. A black sedan appeared at the edge of the plaza, guided by a petty officer on foot. It stopped near the refreshment table, and the rear door opened. A woman stepped out. She was tall, with dark skin and high cheekbones and eyes that Raymond recognized instantly. Bishop's eyes, the same eyes that had looked at him with trust and brotherhood and love in a jungle 40 years ago. Grace Okonkwo was 40 years old. She wore a simple black dress and carried a single white flower. Her eyes scanned the crowd until they found the memorial wall, found the cluster of people gathered there, found the old man in the tattered jacket who was staring at her as if seeing a ghost. She began to walk toward him. Raymond could not move, could not breathe, could not do anything but watch as Bishop's daughter crossed the plaza with the same purposeful stride her father had used, the same confidence, the same grace that had given her her name. The crowd parted before her. The Admiral stepped aside. Vasquez moved back, and then she was standing in front of him, Bishop's daughter, looking at him with her father's eyes. "You are him," she said. Her voice was steady, but there were tears on her cheeks. "You respect her." Raymond tried to speak. Failed. Tried again. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry. I cannot save him. I tried. Grace Okonkwo stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder. "Thank you for being with him. Thank you for holding him. Thank you for finishing what he started." Raymond's arms hung at his sides for a moment. Then, slowly, they came up to embrace her back, and he held Bishop's daughter the way he had once held Bishop himself, the way he had held him in that jungle while the life drained out of him and the extraction helicopter thundered overhead. "He is proud of you," Grace whispered. "I know he is. He is so proud of you." They stood together at the wall for a long time. Raymond and Grace, the man who had survived and the daughter of the man who had not. The white flower she carried now rested at the base of the bronze panel, directly beneath her father's name. Grace kept her hand on Raymond's arm, as if afraid he might disappear, as if the ghost her father's friends had spoken of might fade back into the shadows he had called home for so long. "Tell me about him," she said. "Tell me about my father. Not the mission, not the operation. Just him. Who was he when you knew him?" Raymond's throat tightened. 40 years of memories pressed against the walls he had built inside himself, demanding release. "He was the funniest man I ever knew," Raymond said finally. "Could make anyone laugh, even in the worst situations, even when everything was falling apart around us." Grace smiled through her tears. "My mother said the same thing. Said he could find humor in anything. He was brave, not reckless, just steady, the kind of man you wanted beside you when things went wrong, because you knew he would never panic, never freeze. He would just do what needed to be done." Raymond's voice grew stronger as the memories flowed. "He talked about you constantly, before you were born. He drove us all crazy with baby name discussions. Wanted something that meant something. Something beautiful. He chose Grace because he said you were the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he had not even met you yet." Grace's hand tightened on his arm. "He held you once," Raymond continued, "before we deployed. Just for a few minutes. You were so small. He was terrified he would drop you." This man who had faced death 100 times was shaking because he was holding his baby girl. A sob escaped Grace's lips. She pressed her free hand to her mouth. He showed everyone the photograph. Raymond smiled at the memory, carried it in his vest pocket, right over his heart, said it was better protection than the ceramic plate. The crowd around them had fallen completely silent. Officers and guests stood motionless, bearing witness to a reunion 40 years in the making. Many were crying openly. Others had bowed their heads as if in prayer. Admiral Vance stood apart, his cane supporting him as tears streamed down his weathered face. This was the man who had saved him. This was the sacrifice that had given him his life. And now, finally, some small measure of healing was being offered to the survivor who had carried the weight alone for so long. Senior Chief Vasquez had moved to the edge of the crowd, her phone still recording. But she was no longer thinking about documentation or verification. She was thinking about her uncle, about the men he had spoken of with such reverence, about the ghosts who walked through walls and never asked for recognition. She was thinking about what it meant to serve in shadows, to give everything and receive nothing, to carry burdens that no one else could see or understand. Raymond turned to face the wall again, his hand finding Bishop's name once more. "I need to tell you something," he said to Grace. "Something I have never told anyone." She waited, patient, present. His last words, Raymond said, "Everyone thinks he told me to complete the mission, to save the lieutenant. And he did. But that is not all he said. Grace's breath caught. "He said to find you," Raymond whispered. "He said to tell you that he loved you, that he was sorry he would not be there to watch you grow up, that he needed you to know, no matter what happened, that you were the best thing he ever did." A sound escaped Grace that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking. "I cannot do it," Raymond continued, his own voice breaking. "I cannot face you, could not face your mother, could not tell her that I came home and her husband did not. So I stayed away, buried myself in more missions. And when those ended, I buried myself in the streets." He turned to face her. "I have carried his last words for 40 years, waiting to deliver them. Too much of a coward to find you. And you found me instead." Grace lowered her hands. Her eyes, Bishop's eyes, were red and swollen, but there was no anger in them. Only compassion, only understanding. "You are not a coward," she said firmly. "You are a man who loved my father so much that losing him broke something inside you. That is not cowardice. That is love." Raymond shook his head. "I abandoned my own family. My children. I left them the same way I left your mother. Without explanation. Without." Grace stepped closer, took both his hands in hers. "Then we find them," she said. "Together. We find your children, and we tell them who their father really is. What he sacrificed. What he survived." Raymond stared at her, at Bishop's daughter, at this woman who should hate him, but instead stood before him offering redemption. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you help me?" "Because my father would want me to," Grace said simply. "Because he gave his life to save people. And if I can help save one more, then his sacrifice means something. Still means something. Every day." She turned to look at the wall, at her father's name carved in bronze. "He is watching us right now," she said. "I know it. And he is telling you the same thing he told you 40 years ago." Raymond's voice came out broken. "What?" Grace smiled. "That he is proud of you, that you did good, that it is time to stop running and come home." The words hit Raymond like a blow. Come home. He had not had a home in 12 years, had not believed he deserved one. But looking at Grace, looking at the admiral who had searched for him for 4 decades, looking at the crowd of strangers who stood witnessing his story with tears on their faces, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. The ceremony had been forgotten. The speeches that had been prepared, the wreaths that had been arranged, the schedule that Captain Vance had spent 3 months perfecting. None of it mattered anymore. What was unfolding at the memorial wall was more powerful than any planned tribute could ever be. Admiral Vance stepped forward, his cane tapping against the stone pathway. The crowd parted for him automatically, instinctively, the way it always did for men who carried the weight of command. "Master Chief Holloway," he said, and his voice carried across the silent plaza. "I believe it is time." Raymond looked up from Grace's face. "Time for what, sir?" "Time for the truth to be told. Fully, completely, so that everyone here understands exactly who you are and what you did." "Sir, I did not come here for." "I know why you came," the Admiral said gently. "But you are here now, and these people deserve to know. They deserve to understand why a man who saved my life is wearing a jacket held together with safety pins. Why a hero of this nation has been sleeping under bridges while the rest of us live the lives he made possible." Raymond's jaw tightened. The instinct to retreat, to disappear, to fade back into the shadows was overwhelming. But Grace's hand was still in his, and Bishop's eyes were still looking at him from her face. He straightened his spine, squared his shoulders, and for the first time in 40 years, he let the soldier emerge fully. "Master Chief Petty Officer Raymond Holloway," he said, and his voice had changed. Stronger, clearer. The voice of a man who had commanded respect in places that officially never existed. United States Navy. SEAL qualification in 1976. Assigned to Unit Phantom, Naval Special Warfare Development Group in 1979. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on every word. Unit Phantom conducted 6 operations between 1979 and 1985, Raymond continued. All classified, all deniable. We extracted prisoners from locations that our government could not officially acknowledge. We eliminated threats that could never be publicly addressed. We went where no one else could go and did what no one else could do. He paused, his eyes moving across the faces of the crowd. December 14th, 1983. Operation Distant Thunder. 6 operators inserted by submarine off the coast of Panama. Mission objective was extraction of Lieutenant Theodore Vance, captured during a reconnaissance operation that went wrong. The admiral bowed his head, listening to his own rescue described by the man who had carried him to safety. Insertion was successful, Raymond said. Target was located and secured, but extraction was compromised. Ambush at the compound. We lost 2 men in the first 30 seconds. Peterson and Kowalski. Good men. Brothers. His voice wavered, but did not break. We fought our way out. Bishop on point. Me on overwatch. Lieutenant Vance unconscious on my shoulder. 3 miles to the extraction point through hostile territory. Raymond's hand moved to the jacket. To Bishop's jacket. At approximately 0300 hours, we took fire from a position we had already cleared. Muzzle flash from a 3rd-floor window. I was too slow. By the time I acquired the target and fired, Bishop was already down. Silence. Absolute silence. Not even the wind dared to interrupt. He took 3 rounds to the chest, below the ceramic plate. The kind of wound that gives you just enough time to say goodbye. Raymond's voice cracked, but he pressed on. He told me to complete the mission. Told me to get the lieutenant to extraction. Told me he would catch up. We both knew he would not, but I followed his order. Because that is what we did. We followed orders. We completed missions. We sacrificed everything for the men beside us and the country we served. He looked at Admiral Vance. I carried the lieutenant 3 miles through that jungle. Alone, in the dark, while Bishop held off the pursuit until he had nothing left to give. His rifle went silent at 0347 hours. I know because I was counting every shot, waiting for the one that never came. Tears streamed down the Admiral's face, down Grace's face, down the faces of officers and guests and enlisted personnel who had never known that men like this existed. I reached extraction at 0412 hours, Raymond continued. Loaded the lieutenant onto the helicopter. Watched the medics work on him. And then I sat in the corner of that aircraft and did not speak for 3 days. He touched Bishop's name on the wall. Samuel Okonkwo, Marcus Peterson, David Kowalski. 3 men who died that night so that 1 man could live. 3 names on this wall. 3 brothers I left in that jungle. His hand fell to his side. I was awarded the Navy Cross for that operation. Never wore it. Never attended the ceremony. The medal is in a box somewhere. Probably thrown away by now. Because medals do not bring back the dead. Recognition does not fill the hole left by the men you lost. The Admiral stepped forward, stood beside Raymond, faced the crowd. This man saved my life, he said, his voice ringing across the plaza. He carried me through 3 miles of jungle while his brothers died around him. He completed his mission when lesser men would have broken. And he has spent 40 years believing that he failed because he could not save everyone. He turned to Raymond. You did not fail, Master Chief. You succeeded, against impossible odds, at unimaginable cost. You brought me home. You gave me 40 years of life, a career, a family. Everything I have, everything I am, exists because of what you did that night. The Admiral raised his hand to his brow. A salute, crisp and formal despite his age. On behalf of the United States Navy, he said, and on behalf of the Vance family, I thank you for your service. I thank you for your sacrifice. And I thank you for finally allowing us to honor you the way you deserve. One by one, the officers in the crowd raised their hands, saluting. The enlisted personnel followed. Then the civilians, those who had served and those who had not, raising their hands in gestures of respect that transcended protocol. Raymond Holloway stood at the memorial wall, surrounded by salutes, with Bishop's daughter at his side and Bishop's name at his back. And for the first time in 40 years, he did not feel alone. The salutes held for a long moment. Then, slowly hands lowered, but the reverence in the air remained. Something sacred had happened at this memorial, and everyone present knew they had witnessed it. Captain Harrison Vance stood at the edge of the crowd, his arms still raised in salute long after the others had lowered theirs. His face was wet with tears he had not bothered to wipe away. His body trembled with the weight of what he had done and what he now understood. He had mocked this man, threatened him, called him a disgrace. And this man had carried his father through hell so that Harrison Vance could exist at all. The crowd began to shift, murmuring, processing what they had witnessed. But Vance did not move, could not move. His legs had turned to stone beneath him. His father's voice cut through his paralysis. "Harrison." Vance looked up. The Admiral was walking toward him, leaning heavily on his cane, his face unreadable. "Dad," Vance said, and his voice came out broken. "I did not know. I cannot have known." He looked like what? The Admiral asked quietly. "A vagrant, a drunk, a man who had given up on himself." "Yes." The Admiral stopped in front of his son. For a long moment, he simply looked at him, looked at the uniform, the medals, the polished shoes and pressed trousers, all the trappings of a career built on appearance and protocol. "I have told you that story 100 times," the Admiral said. "The jungle, the darkness, the man who carried me out." You nodded. You said the right words. But you never listened. "Not really." "I know," Vance whispered. "I know that now. Do you know why I told you that story so many times?" Vance shook his head. "Because I wanted you to understand that heroism does not always wear a clean uniform. That sacrifice does not always come with recognition. That the men who give the most are often the ones who receive the least." The Admiral's voice hardened. "And today, you looked at such a man and saw only something to be removed. An inconvenience. A stain on your perfect ceremony. Dad, you call him a disgrace." The Admiral's words landed like blows. "You threatened to have him arrested. You mocked the jacket he wears to honor his dead brother. You did all of this in front of witnesses, in front of cameras, in front of the man himself." Vance's knees buckled. He caught himself against a nearby chair, barely staying upright. "Your career is over," the Admiral said flatly. "You know that. The videos are already spreading. By tomorrow, every news outlet in the country will have this story. The Navy captain who humiliated the hero, who saved his father's life." Vance nodded. He had known it from the moment his father had recognized Raymond, had felt his future crumbling with each word spoken at the memorial wall. "But that is not what concerns me," the Admiral continued. "What concerns me is that my son, my own flesh and blood, has become the kind of man who judges worth by appearance, who sees a tattered jacket and assumes the worst, who would deny a grieving veteran access to his brother's name because he did not look respectable enough." "I am sorry," Vance said. The words felt pathetic, inadequate. "I am so sorry. Do not apologize to me." The Admiral turned and pointed toward the memorial wall, where Raymond still stood with Grace beside him. "Apologize to him." Vance looked at Raymond, at the man he had tortured for the better part of an hour, the man who had endured every insult with quiet dignity, the man who had saved his father and, by extension, had given Vance his very existence. "He does not want to hear from me," Vance said. "He must hate me." The Admiral shook his head. "Men like Raymond Holloway do not hate. They do not have room for it. They have seen too much, lost too much, carried too much. Hatred is a luxury for people who have never truly suffered." He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Go to him. Tell him you were wrong. And then spend the rest of your life trying to become the kind of man who would never make that mistake again." Vance swallowed hard. His legs felt like rubber as he began to walk toward the memorial wall. The crowd parted for him, but not with respect, with something closer to curiosity, or perhaps judgment. Raymond saw him coming. His expression did not change, did not harden or soften. He simply watched the captain approach with eyes that had seen far worse than an arrogant officer having a bad day. Vance stopped 3 feet away. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I was wrong," he finally managed. "Everything I said, everything I did, I was wrong." Raymond said nothing. "I looked at you, and I saw what I wanted to see. What was easy to see. I did not look deeper, did not consider that there might be more to your story. I just assumed. You assumed I was nothing," Raymond said quietly. "A vagrant, a liar, a disgrace." "Yes." Vance's voice cracked. "And I was the disgrace. Not you. Never you." Raymond studied him for a long moment. studied the tears on his face, the trembling hands, the shattered certainty in his eyes. "Your father is a good man," Raymond said finally. "He survived something that should have killed him and built a life worth living. That took courage. That took strength." He glanced at the admiral, who watched from a distance. "He raised you," Raymond continued, "loved you, tried to teach you what matters. The fact that you did not learn it is not entirely his fault. Some lessons we have to learn for ourselves." Vance nodded miserably. "You have a choice now," Raymond said. "You can let this moment define you. Let the shame eat you alive. Disappear into bitterness and regret the way I did for 40 years. He stepped closer to Vance, close enough that only the captain could hear his next words. "Or you can let it change you. Let it break down everything you thought you knew and build something better in its place. That is the harder path, but it is the only one worth walking." Vance looked into Raymond's eyes, into the eyes of the man he had wronged so deeply. "How?" he whispered. "How do I even begin?" Raymond glanced at Grace, at the admiral, at the wall where Bishop's name waited in bronze. "You start by remembering," he said, "every veteran you see on these streets. Every man or woman who looks broken. Remember that they might have carried a weight you will never understand. And instead of judging them, instead of dismissing them, you ask yourself one question." "What question?" Raymond's voice was quiet but firm. "What did they survive to get here? And what can I do to help them survive one more day?" 3 months later, Raymond Holloway stood at the window of his apartment and watched the sun rise over the naval base in the distance. The apartment was small, simple, a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen barely large enough for one person, but had walls, a roof, heat that worked. And for the first time in 12 years, Raymond had a key that belonged to him. Admiral Vance had arranged it, had refused to take no for an answer, had shown up at the shelter 3 days after the memorial ceremony with paperwork already completed and a look in his eyes that said this was not negotiable. "You carried me for 3 miles, the admiral had said. "The least I can do is give you a place to sleep." The jacket hung by the door. Bishop's jacket. It had been cleaned and mended, the safety pins replaced with proper stitching, the tears repaired with careful hands. Grace had insisted, had taken it to a tailor who specialized in military uniforms and had it restored without losing any of its character. Its history. Raymond touched the fabric as he passed. "Good morning, brother." The Veteran Reintegration Center was a 20-minute walk from his apartment. Raymond made the trip every day now, not as a client, but as a volunteer. The program was small, run by a retired Navy corpsman named Elena who had spent 30 years patching together broken sailors and refused to stop just because she had left the service. Raymond had met her the week after the ceremony. She had seen the news coverage, recognized something in his eyes, and shown up at the admiral's doorstep asking if the Master Chief might be interested in helping others find their way back. He had said yes before she finished the question. The center occupied a converted warehouse near the waterfront. Nothing fancy. Folding tables, donated chairs, a coffee maker that had seen better decades. But it was warm, it was safe, and it was filled with men and women who understood what it meant to carry invisible wounds. Raymond arrived at 7:30, the same time he arrived every morning. Elena was already there, sorting through paperwork at her desk. "Morning, Master Chief," she said without looking up. "Morning, Elena. Got a new one coming in today. Young guy, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Sleeping in his car for the last 6 months." Raymond nodded. He remembered sleeping in cars. Remembered the way your back seized up after a few hours. The way the cold crept through the windows no matter how many blankets you piled on top of yourself. "I will talk to him," Raymond said. "I was hoping you would say that." The young veteran arrived at 9. His name was Marcus, 26 years old. Eyes that had seen too much and a posture that screamed, "Leave me alone," even as he walked through the door, looking for help. Raymond approached him slowly, carefully, the way you approach a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "Marcus," he said, "I am Raymond. Welcome." Marcus looked at him, looked at the gray beard, the weathered face, the scars that time had softened but never erased. "You are the guy from the news," Marcus said. "The one at the memorial." Raymond nodded. "That is me. They said you lived on the streets for 12 years. 12 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Raymond confirmed. But who was counting? Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. The faintest hint of a connection, of recognition, of understanding that the man standing before him knew exactly what he was going through. "How did you get out?" Marcus asked. Raymond considered the question, considered all the ways he could answer it. The Admiral, Grace, the ceremony that had forced him back into the light. "I did not get out," he said finally. "I got found by people who refused to let me disappear, who saw past what I looked like and recognized what I was carrying." He gestured toward an empty chair. "Sit down," he said. "Tell me your story, and let me tell you mine." Marcus sat, and Raymond began to talk. Not about the ceremony, not about the Admiral or Grace or the videos that had made him briefly famous. He talked about the jungle, about Bishop, about the 40 years he had spent running from a guilt that was never his to carry. He talked about Margaret, about the children he had abandoned, about the note he had left and the years of silence that followed. And he talked about the letter he had finally written. 3 pages, 12 years of apologies. A return address for the first time since he had walked away. His daughter had written back. A single page, for words that had broken him open all over again. "We never stopped looking. They were coming to visit next month." His son and his daughter. Grandchildren he had never met. A family he had convinced himself he did not deserve. Grace had been right. Bishop would have wanted this. Would have wanted Raymond to stop running, to come home, to let himself be found. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Raymond finished, the young veteran was quiet for a long moment. "You really think I can come back from this?" Marcus asked. "From where I am?" Raymond leaned forward. "I walked through worse than you are walking through now," he said. "And I'm still here, still trying. If I can make it back, so can you." He reached out and gripped Marcus's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," Raymond said. "That is the first thing you need to understand. Whatever you are carrying, you do not have to carry it by yourself. Not anymore." Marcus's eyes glistened. His jaw tightened. But he did not pull away. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, please consider subscribing to our channel. Share in the comments who the quiet hero in your life is, someone whose appearance might hide an extraordinary story. And remember, every person you pass on the street is carrying something. Some of them might just be carrying more than you could ever imagine. Thank you for watching. That evening, Raymond returned to his apartment as the sun set over the water. He stood at the window, watching the light fade, and thought about Bishop, about the promise he had made in that jungle 40 years ago. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, worn soft at the edges. 2 faces, his children, taken the day before Margaret's diagnosis, before everything fell apart. "Soon," he whispered to the photograph. "Soon." Then he turned and looked at the jacket hanging by the door, at the patch that had finally been recognized, at the fabric that had kept him alive through 12 winters on the street. "Still here, brother," he said softly. "Still trying. And this time, I think I am finally going to make it home." The jacket seemed to ripple slightly in the evening breeze coming through the window, and Raymond Holloway smiled for the first time in longer than he could remember.